video start tomorrow.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We see that there are some attendees still logging in. So we'll just wait a couple more seconds and then we'll get started. Okay. All right. Well, thank you, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us for the 2021 UN South Asia Forum on Business and Human Rights. This is the session, as you see, titled The Need for an Effective Non-Judicial Grievance Mechanism, Showcasing Example. I'm Dory from Q Design, and I'll be your technical facilitator today. Both the chat function and Q&A will be on, so if you have questions specifically for the speakers, please use the Q&A function. Please note that the session today is being recorded. If you have any questions about Zoom or require technical assistance, please feel free to raise your hand or send a message to me over in chat. I'll now hand over to Suhasini. Suhasini, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dory. Good evening to all from India. My name is Suhasini Singh, and I'm going to be your host and moderator for this session called The Need for Effective Non-Judicial Grievance Mechanism. We are going to showcase an example of Fairware's grievance mechanism. Fairware works with brands, workers, and experts to improve conditions in the garment factories for those who make our clothes. Principle 30 of the UN Guiding Principle says that the industry, multi-stakeholder, or other collaborative initiatives that are based on respect for human rights related standards should ensure that effective grievance mechanisms are available. The UNGPs envisage 3 types of mechanisms to provide access to effective remedy in business-related human rights abuses. The first one being state-based judicial mechanism, state-based non-judicial grievance mechanism, and non-state-based grievance mechanism. We believe that access to remedy is essential because it can mitigate the damage suffered and deter future violations. At Fairware, the complaint mechanism adds another layer to our supply chain verification role. We provide an operational system to our member brands, an operational grievance mechanism to our member brands. We communicate directly with the complainant throughout the process. We also do investigation of the issue of the complaint that is raised in the system. And then last but not the least, we verify whether the remediation took place finally or not. Some of the major characteristics of the complaint mechanism, of Fairware's complaint mechanism, is that it provides a safety net for the workers. And by no means it replaces the local system. We rather encourage the complainant, whoever, it can be a worker or a supervisor or factory management, to first exhaust the existing mechanism at the factory level. And this can be factory level grievance mechanism, like a grievance cell, or going through the works committee, or approaching a union to address the grievances. If none of these provide a remedy or provides a solution to the worker, only then they should come and approach the Fairware's complaint mechanism. So it's more a safety net for workers and not a replacement of the existing mandatory systems that should be at the factory level. Secondly, there's a very active stakeholder engagement during the whole process of remediating a complaint. We facilitate remedy of complaint using leverage of the brand. And there's a presence of local team in 11 production countries, which allows us to to check whether the complaint is grounded and whether the remediation took place finally or not. In this session, we will showcase the grievance mechanism of Fairware Foundation through the lens of varied users. And to share their views, we have 3 panelists who have agreed to speak their experience of using the mechanism. And I would like to welcome them and to introduce them to the audience here. We have Ms. Parvati Madappa from CVDEP India. She's a program officer at CVTEP and also a complaint handler herself of the Fair Ware's complaint mechanism. The organization, CVTEP India, is a well-known labor organization from India, and they work on supply chain, labor conditions in the supply chain and corporate accountability. Mr. Amirul Haq Amin, he's the president of the National Garment Workers Federation, Bangladesh. And Ms. Katharina Fest from Lutzkesvista, it's a German brand. She heads the corporate social responsibility work of the brand. Welcome you all, and thank you for taking out time today to speak in this session. I'll first invite Ms. Parvati to share her view as a complaint handler and also as someone working in a labor organization on the existence and the usage of the complaint mechanism that Fair Ware offers. Parvati, over to you.
So, hello everybody. I'm glad to be a part of this session. To start off with, as Suhasini said, let me speak about what is the mechanism that is there by Fair Ware. There is a complaints number, and this complaints number is distributed to the workers in the Fair Ware's member brands factories, where workers are able to are given cards which showcase this number. This distribution is done via either training programs or during the audits that Fair Ware conducts in the factories. So the most important thing being that the complaints number is in the local language. So there are multiple languages that Fair Ware has this complaints number written out in, and the pamphlets are handed over to the workers, and also they are displayed in the factory. So if a worker has any queries, any concerns, they're free to call on this complaints number. That's the Fair Ware's complaints mechanism that's available to the workers in the garment factories.
Yeah, Parvati, also you can take the audience or share with the audience your experience of being part of the complaint handling, the whole operation, and also what are the among the available options to the workers. How does the Fair Ware's mechanism play itself in the whole gamut of other grievance mechanisms available? So I would request you to share basically address all the points that has been shared, that the pointers that was shared earlier.
So it is very important, first of all, for us to understand that the guiding principles itself stands on three pillars of protect, respect, and remedy. And all three are very equally important and uphold each other. And when we look at, most of you are aware of it, the first one being protecting citizens from all human rights violations. And here we look at violations by, if you ask who, then it's the companies, it's the big corporations that we're looking at. And then we have respect, where we have to respect that there's a component of corporate responsibility and respecting human rights. So that's how. And remedy. So remedy is something that we see where we look at appropriate steps that we take to ensure that there is effective mechanisms that are there for accessing. This could be legislative mechanisms, this could be some judicial mechanisms, or and it plays within a particular jurisdiction. But now it's very important to understand for us that we are in trade between countries, and countries have their own boundaries and their jurisdictions. And how is it that some violation that has happened in a garment factory here, what is it, how is it connected to the global north? So then we have to understand that the products that are being produced in the south are being exported and are consumed by majority of people in the north, and that's how it's important that we hold the companies responsible for their actions that lead to grave forms of human rights violations in the factories. So looking at these, of course, like Suhasini mentioned earlier, that because we are in a jurisdiction, especially in India, we have our own laws in place. We have labor laws that are there. We have the Factories Act that govern the factories and the workers. The welfare schemes are there. There are different committees that address different issues within the factories. But somewhere it's in my experience of the last 5 years being a complaints handler, I've seen different kinds of cases that come into this complaints number, which maybe workers are not confident to speak to the management in their respective workplaces. So workers take into consideration the a kind of rapport that they have to say that, okay, this is a complaint number. They don't know who's on the other side of the phone. It takes a bit of effort for the worker to actually come out and speak to someone on the other side, who is on the other side of the phone, whose face they have never seen. But when they hear a familiar language, when they hear that you're not being judgmental about a complainant, that's when I think the workers take you into confidence and speak about the issues. Also, during the entire interaction with the worker, it's very important that there is a factor of confidentiality, because every day in and out, we see that in the garment factories, workers are being thrown out for raising their voice against anything that's happening, or to when they address a query to the management. So we, as in terms of this complaint number, try to keep the workers' names anonymous and try to safeguard try to safeguard the privacy of the worker, and try to raise these complaints to Fairwear, who raises it to the brands. In my experience, also, I've seen that there are workers also reach out to multiple places. Sometimes they reach out to the trade unions. Of course, the trade union are very, not very really strong, because freedom of association is not openly available for workers, because there is a lot of union busting that happens in the production countries. But what we need to understand is that they also opt out to reach out to the trade union. If they are aware of one, they reach out to the committees in their respective factories, and they reach out to this helpline number. And in my experience, I've seen that there have been, from the time we've started, the number of calls that come into the helpline numbers have increased. And we've seen a lot of positive cases. We also, from the experience of Cividep, I've been a part of some negotiation as well, along with Fairwear and with the factory management. And that, I think, is very important, because at least, and the workers, so you are there is a transparency amongst all the players involved, and you're sitting together on the same table to sort out an issue, which is not available in maybe the other grievance redressal mechanisms that are there. Also, I think when we go through these complaints mechanisms, we see that brands are more responsive to Fairwear as an MSI, as compared to if we have to directly go and speak to them, or if the union has to negotiate with the brand, they wouldn't be so open to talk. And this is some things that I would see as a positivity, as a part of handling the complaints number.
Right. And how are the grievance mechanisms used? For what issues and by whom mostly, in your experience?
So most of the times it is the workers, and the reason is because I think they are the ones who face a lot of harassment within the factories, especially if you look at the garment sector across the globe. We see that it's predominantly women who are working there, and since most of the world is also patriarchal, there's some kind of suppression that they always face. So when we look at these, it seems that there are more and more workers who access this in terms of just making a call and checking out on the and to raise a query. But we have seen also cases where just workers would call to check on some information, like they're not able to, they do not know how to access their social security entitlement. They do not, or they do not know how to calculate their wages. They feel that there is an issue that has raised, that they have in that particular month's salary. They have not been paid fully. So just to ask about a query. So there are multiple, and an issue, it need not be a really serious issue. The different kinds of issues could be as simple as just asking for a query to say that how can I take leave? Even as simple as that. Who do I go and ask to take leave? It could be as simple as that, to maybe harassment as well. So there is everything in between. It could be just to for workers to say that they are leaving the job and they have not got their settlement, they left their job, they have not got their provident fund, they've been targeted in the factory and harassed in the factory. The supervisors are not treating them fairly. So there are all kinds of complaints that come into the helpline number. And we have also seen that we have also witnessed cases where supervisors have also come out and raised their query, wherein the management actually, in one of the cases, had blamed the supervisor, maybe blame the supervisor, and the supervisor also has raised a query in the complaints number. So I don't think as a mechanism Fairware has a limitation to the kind of people who can access it. I think it is available for everyone in the factory, right from the top management until the lowest level of worker in the factory.
Right. And what would you say about the outcome of the complaints once it is raised and it is admissible in the system? What has been the outcome, and from the workers' perspective or from a labor organization perspective? And what are the challenges that are faced, combining it with the challenges that are faced in ensuring the access to such mechanism by workers and unions?
I think one of the, I mean, I should speak of both positive and negative things. But one thing that I would always mention is that there is not one kind of mechanism that works for everyone, like how not one shoe size fits all. It's the same thing with different grievance mechanisms as well. Each case might have a different approach. It can have a different kind of dealing, and it could have a different kind of road that a worker has to take. So every case is different. And when we look at positive things, like I mentioned, that brands are up for negotiation with having Fairware or having the MSI on board. We have more options that we can talk to the management, senior most management. We don't have to go through any other channel. There is also in such meetings, there is also a lot of promptness that we have seen through that the management speak of. So on the other hand, we see that I think the overall time that each of these complaints take is long. I'm not comparing it to anything, because a case in the labor court can take longer than what the Fairware's mechanism is. The complaint, the helpline number is, but irrespective of it, because I also, as a person who has handled complaints, I also understand that it takes a lot of effort for a complaint to be raised here in India, and then the complaint being sent across the globe. Of course, it's not that someone is taking a parcel and going, but by the time it reaches the person, the concerned person in the home country, and then you contact the brand, you identify which is the brand, you contact the brand has a meeting with the management, and by the time they come back to us, it's a whole big process. And I think somewhere in between, as a complaint number, I feel that because also you do multiple things and you lose out on the communication with the worker in saying that, okay, because when a worker calls, what would you say? Okay, it'll take a week, or would it take 10 days? We just have to say that, no, we are also waiting. So that is somewhere where I see a lag, but otherwise, there are a lot of positive things as well.
Right. Last two questions, Parvati, in the interest of time and for other speakers to speak. So one is in the backdrop of the pandemic now, how can existing grievance mechanisms be made effective?
In with the pandemic, I think again the cross is being borne by the workers itself. The reason is that the pandemic has shut many doors for them. There have been factories that have shut down, and the labor court is not functional because of the COVID pandemic. They were on leave and they have a lot of other things. It's not functional in full strength. So the workers actually do not have a place to go to where they can raise their query. And I think in these cases, something like other grievance mechanisms works better, like how the helpline number is. There are also some brands that have a direct online complaints mechanism that is available. Of course, these are all not judicial and you can't do much, but still there is some kind of pressure that is built upon the worker, the management, to ensure that workers' rights are not violated in any form. So I think like it is always, and like I earlier mentioned, we have to have, I mean, it's not just one kind of grievance mechanism that is required. We need multiple mechanisms, and multiple mechanisms which are accessible for the workers so that they can directly reach out to and raise their concerns. And I think this pandemic has been an eye-opener for all of us.
Yeah. A last question, Parvati. So CBDEP as an organization has a direct interface with workers and grassroots organizations. What grievance mechanisms workers normally prefer to use for work-related problems? And where does the Fair Wares complaint helpline fit? To what extent the Fair Ware complaint mechanism fit their need?
So workers mostly try to use, as far as my understanding and working in the sector for the past 6-7 years goes, workers basically look at trying to reach out to the closest trade union at times where they address their queries. Some of them who do not know of the trade union go and reach out to their managers in the factory, where most of the time that mechanism does not work. Though in India the laws are available where workers can go to different committees within the factory to raise various queries. Workers are not aware of each of these, what the functions of these committees are. Though they would know that there is a canteen committee or there is a works committee, they would not know that if there's no drinking water, who do they go and raise this complaint to? So that's the issue. So there are different things most of the time. Also, it's very important to add that because of the lack of knowledge amongst the workers on different mechanisms that are available, most of the time we see that the easiest option for any worker is quit the job and join another factory. That's something that we've seen in and out on a daily basis. If you ask where does Fairware fit in, then I would say that maybe in Bangalore, I can say that maybe the number of factories that are members of Fairware, I mean the brands, Fairware brands are producing is very few. And that's how the reach is very limited, maybe as compared to the other states in India.
Right.
So that's a hurdle that we have.
Okay, so there are two questions from the chat box that I'm going to read out to you. And with these two questions, we'll end your part, Parvati. So thank you for thank you for sharing the complaint mechanism. Could you share one example of each successful of grievance redressal as well as had challenges in remediating the grievance? Shall I repeat it? Yeah. So one successful case and one with a challenge in remediating the grievance.
So I remember this was when I took up the complaints mechanism, and we had a worker from a particular factory who had come stating that his settlement was not paid rightly, and also that he had a he had some health issues, and that's why he had gone on leave and could not get his settlement. It took a while to understand, because that person had taken off in between. So there was no communication that he had given to the factory saying that he wanted a leave or his health was he was facing health issues. So we had a lot of, I remember that this was the first year that I was handling complaints, and there was a lot of discussion back and forth with the management. And towards the end, it took I think a year and a half, if I'm not wrong, where the final settlement was done in the presence of, I think, Fairware itself. So this is one of the cases that I could remember. And yeah, is there another question?
Yeah, one where there was a challenge in remediating the case.
Challenge.
Yeah.
I can. Challenges are, actually the problem is that there are a number of problems in terms of workers also. Workers sometimes don't have a telephone here. So, they try and call you from another number, and then by the time you reach, it could be a neighbor's number, it could be a relative's number. So by the time you reach out to them, it takes a lot of energy. So when I said this 1.5 years, I think about few months went away when the worker was not in town. The worker was back in the village. So you didn't have any way to communicate with the worker. So we had to wait for the worker to come back, and then the information was passed on. So this was the same case.
Okay. So the second question and the last is, does calling a helpline number put them at risk from their employer or peer, leading to some sort of alienation or more risky situation?
So unless it is a specific case, I think we try, and one thing is we ask the worker very clearly whether they wish to remain anonymous or we could name them. So unless if they want to be anonymous, it stays anonymous. But if it is a specific case, like let's say there is someone who's been harassed, and the person has already approached the management in the factory and then has raised the query to us, then the managements definitely know of it. And there we have seen that then in that case, there is a lot of issues that the workers face within the factory. There is a lot of torture that's given to them. They've been targeted, they've been unnecessarily called to do odd jobs, or to just do jobs which are not meant, or not something that they would be doing, or give them enormous production targets. We have seen this, but the complaints number itself, as a process, it says that we can be anonymous. I mean, the worker can remain anonymous until the end of the case as well.
Right. Thank you so much, Parvati.
Thanks, Swasti.
I'll now shift to Mr. Amirul Haq.
Yes.
Yeah. Mr. Amirul, you are from a labor union, a National Government Workers Federation from Bangladesh, and very actively involved in, with workers' issues. And for Bangladesh, government industry is such a vital industry, and it means even much more for workers themselves. Now, given this scenario, and what is your or understanding of the grievance mechanisms available to the workers currently? I mean, generally, not just MSI related, but what is the landscape of grievance mechanism for workers from a union perspective?
So, thank you. So, you say, yes, Suhasini, you really mentioned about the garment industry in Bangladesh, because this is actually the biggest industrial sector, and this sector also earned the highest foreign money. So, in this sector now, 4.2 million workers are working. So everywhere there is the garment factory. So this is really a very big area. So there are a lot of complaints happen in this factory. Different, it is different form. Parvati earlier mentioned about some form of the of the grievances. So mainly mainly we have several type of mechanism of grievance handling. Like you see, there is the labor court, and there is the second bilateral committee with BGMA and trade union. Third, different MNCs like Fair Foundation. Fourth, you see urgent appeal case by the Clean Clothes Campaign. So this type of different form of grievance handling mechanism actually work in Bangladesh. Also, besides this, there is WRC, Workers' Right Consortium. They also handle some of the grievances in their related companies. So the problem is in the labor court, it is actually took a long time, sometimes 5 years, 6 years time and the time. In the bilateral committee, that is with the BGME. BGME, it means Bangladesh Garments Manufacturer and Exporter Association. There is a mechanism between BGMA and trade union. 9 trade union federation are part of this bilateral committee, and there are 9 representatives from the owner side, and there is the chief arbitrator. So by this, we submit the complaint to the BGMA arbitration committee, and every month there are 2 meetings happen, and some of the cases resolved here. So these 2 mechanism, one is labor court. It is actually take long time. Second, bilateral committee with the Garment Owners Association. It also resolve some of the cases, but some of the cases it cannot resolve. Thirdly, MNCs like Fair Foundation, it is comparatively more strong than the other 2, like, because in the Fair process, they actually called the buyer, and government owners, they do not care about the government, they do not care about the BGMA, but they always respect the branch and the representative of the branch. So Fairware Foundation, in their dispute resolution, they actually bring the representative from the branch. So and that's the reason it is effective. Also, you see in the urgent appeal cases, it is also work with the branch. So it is also work in Bangladesh.
Right. Now, you said grievance mechanisms such as that of fairways or other MSIs, multi-stakeholder initiatives. It is stronger than the labor code or the other bilateral mechanisms because of the presence of the brand, because the brand is directly involved in resolving the case.
Yes.
Now,
Yes. Suhasini.
such grievance mechanisms used, and in your experience, mainly for what issues, and what has been the outcome so far in your experience? Are workers willing to go for such mechanisms, MSI's mechanism, or they rather go to the court or the bilateral mechanisms available?
First thing you see, our worker, they do not directly choice any of the mechanism. They actually come to the federation or branch office of the federation with the grievances, and then we decide, we the federation or trade union, we actually decide which cases we will send on what grievance or mechanism. Like if we see that this is very simple case, so then we actually give it to the bilateral committee with the VGMA and VKMA. if we see that this case is big merit is very good and long-term working people, then we also hand over these things to the labor code. And sometime when we see that um, uh, labor court, labor court and a bilateral committee, it is the management or the factory who actually did this violation. They are not respecting the VGME, or even they do not going to the labor court. Then we actually choose the Fair Wear Foundation or Clean Cloth Campaign or WRC, because you see, I already mentioned that they come to resolve this complaint by this mechanism, because they know that if the brand and if when brand are present, they if they do not hear the hear the brand's comment or solution, then they will lose their business. That is the reason you see among the all this federation or all this complaint mechanism, you see this type of MNCs mechanism, it is actually workable. And you actually mentioned what type of complaint happened. There are a lot of type of complaint comes to the union, but mainly uh, non-payment and illegal firing from the job. These two are the major portion of the complaint.
Okay, right. And how did the grievance mechanism support workers to voice their needs and problems during this pandemic?
So this time also during the pandemic, you see, the situation was really very bad. You see, before the earlier time, there was the normal cases, was during the pandemic, lot of factories was closed, lot of layoff happened. So more than 200,000 workers actually lost their job during this pandemic. So most of the workers, they actually jobless workers, they actually came to the federation office, and with the National Government Workers Federation, we actually handle many of the cases. Because of the handling of the many cases as many factories, 73,967 victim workers actually benefited by the National Government Workers Federation. Benefited, it means that some workers, they actually receive their compensation from the factory owners who did not pay the workers payment earlier, and many of the workers, they receive compensation against of the illegal factory closure. So in this category, 39,888 victim workers, they receive the compensation or outstanding workers from the management. During this time, you see 26,508 workers, they actually reinstated in their job by the National Government Workers Federation. Besides these two, we also provided some direct support to the victim workers, as well as we also did some activities about the awareness raising on coronavirus. So you see, in this period, more complaint actually came to our hands, and we tried with our best to handle these cases so that the workers become benefited. You see about their voice. Yes, when in one factory, some workers actually benefited by the federation, then the other workers, they also inspired, and they also try to come to the union office or federation office, and they also try to unite. So that's in this way their voice also become stronger than the earlier time.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Amril. I have one very instigating question to you. Because while you are coming, I mean, you are representing a union, and ideally, it's a very organic place for workers to come for any complaint redressal. So, I mean, unions are the place where they can air the grievance, and then union takes up the grievance with the management to for negotiation or settlement or whatever. Now, in such a scenario where this is the ideal scene when, and then on the side there are non-judicial grievance mechanisms like fairways or others, WRC or urgent appeals. Do you see it complementary to union work, or I'm trying to elicit some very critical response from you. Do you see it? Do you see such mechanisms as an ally to your work, or you think it is thwarting the whole purpose of union being for workers?
So this mechanism, union actually work, and union actually use this mechanism, and this is also the part of the union work. So in any way, among the all the mechanism, judicial and non-judicial mechanism, grievance handling mechanism, we actually like the Fairware Foundation mechanism, because finally, in the settlement time, they actually organize the fourth parties, related fourth parties. Fourth parties mean they actually they actually bring the representative from the branch, they actually present, and the representative from the management, they actually make sure present of the union representative. They also try to make sure the victim workers or some of the representatives from their side, they are also present. So when this fourth party, they actually sit together by the initiative of the Fairware Foundation, I think this is a very unique process to resolve the problem. Otherwise, sometimes when we raise the issue of the violation, then management actually try to send it to the shoulder of the branch. Sometimes when we call the branch actually say that this is not their responsibility, this is the responsibility of the factory owners. But by the Fairware Foundation, when they also bring the brand and factory management together in presence of the negotiation meeting. So this is really very unique to me.
Okay, that's good to know. One last question to you, Mr. Amirul, is that in what would you consider, you have dealt as a union, you have dealt with several complaint mechanisms. What would you consider as the highlight of a grievance mechanism of MSIs, multi-stakeholder initiative, and what else can be done to make it more effective? If you think there are some, I mean, we heard from Parvati some of the challenges of the mechanism, but in your view, one, what are the highlights of a grievance mechanism such as that of Fairways, and if there are any measures that it can be made more effective?
So I already mentioned about the Fairware mechanism, and I already said that this is really best from my side, because you see, the Fairware Foundation, they actually bring all the stakeholders related to this violation. So that is the in on way the branch, factory management, complainer workers, as well as their union or federation. So nobody then escape from the field unless resolve the mechanism. So that's the reason this is really better to our federation, and we always like the Fair Foundation to resolve this type of mechanism. The weakness or challenge you see, sometimes it actually take long time. Then the workers, they actually become in some way angry. So Fair actually need how they can do this work, remediation work quickly. I think it is actually Fair need to see how they can bring it quickly.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks a lot. My questions are over, but there are two questions from the audience. I'll read it out to you, and we'll see. I mean, I think one question will also partly fall in the next speaker's topic. So the first question is, how do you convince the companies to join or set up a grievance mechanism in case there is no or little international brand pressure? And I think by companies here means the factories, I imagine. How do you convince the companies to join or set up grievance mechanism where there's little brand pressure?
You see, we actually do not directly contact the factory owner or local factory. We actually first see that which brand are working in this factory. Then we find out that whether this brand is related to the Fair Foundation or not. If we see that yes, this is the related to Fair Foundation and they are the member of the Fair Foundation, then we actually sent the grievance or complaint to the Fair Foundation, and Fair Foundation, they actually contact the brands, and brands contact the factory concerning factory. In this way, it is actually work. We, the trade union, we do not directly contact the factory management. It is by the Fair Foundation to brands, brands to factory.
Right. Thank you. There's yet another question on, you shared some figures of these many cases were remediated during the pandemic. I think it's really, I mean, it's referring to those cases. Was it seen that those workers who benefited were in some ways more formalized in terms of having an updated ID proof, or were more prompt and aware than other workers?
Sorry?
So the question that I'm going to read is in reference to the number of cases that were addressed during the pandemic. You gave some figures, 50,000, 53,000
Yeah.
workers. Yeah, so the question is, was it seen that those workers who benefited were in some ways, or I think also in general, were in some ways more formalized in terms that they had an ID proof, or they were more prompt in terms of claiming their rights, and more aware than other workers?
So the workers who actually become benefited by either realization of the compensation at outstanding wages or reinstated in the factory by the National Government Workers Federation, these workers, many of them, they actually stronger their voice, and they actually come up in the uniting process to form the union and form the trade union in the factory level, and they also encourage the other workers when these new workers, they actually face a lot of problems by the management and violation. They actually try to bring these other workers to the union and federation office. It is actually inspiring things, because these workers who actually benefited, they actually share their experience with other workers, and the other workers, when they face problem, they also come to the federation and union office. This is actually a good way.
Okay, thanks a lot. Thank you, Mr. Amirul, for sharing your experience and thoughts about the grievance mechanisms. Now I will invite Ms. Katharina Fest from Blutsketsvista. I finally got the name right of the brand, I hope. Yeah, so Katharina, thank you for agreeing to speak on behalf of workers, on behalf of brands or from brands perspective. What is your thought about the complaint mechanism that you are part of? I mean that, yeah.
Yeah, hi Swasini, hello everybody. Yeah, thank you for having me today. And just to confirm, you spelled the name right. So I know this is pretty tough. So just to explain everybody who's not familiar with us, we're a small German fashion brand, and we have been a Fairwear member for 7 years or something, since 2013. And we have production locations in China and in India. And so our responsibility is, so this is the interesting question. We have to ensure that the workers that work in these production locations we work with have access to effective grievance mechanism. And the question so for us is, if we have to ensure that workers have access to effective grievance mechanism, how do we do it if we usually speak with agents or factory management, but not with workers directly? And so we are approaching this topic in 2 steps. And one of them is, we're checking if there are any grievance mechanisms in place at the factory. And we can check that by, for example, conducting an audit, or we can check it by, what we're doing is we're conducting audits and we're carrying out trainings, both in cooperation with Fairwear. So workers are, being made aware of, okay, so these are your rights and this is the complaint hotline. And also during personal visits, not in the last year, but I've been taking small worker information cards with me during my visits, and I've been meeting worker representatives. But these are, this is a way to see if there are grievance mechanisms in place or not. So it needs a second step to see if these grievance mechanisms are formal or whether they are really effective. And I think what we've learned in the past years is that, I think in our case, they are effective if there are worker committees who conduct like regular meetings. And they may be effective. It depends really on the factory, even if they have suggestion boxes and there is like a complaint handling procedure where the HR, takes care of following up with the complaints and keeping documents and solving these cases. This is, to me, this is something that can be effective. However, if these grievance mechanisms do not fulfill their function as they should, then for us, the Fairwear complaint mechanism comes into play. This really is the line between the worker that can kind of contact us by Fairwear. And even though Parvati has mentioned it earlier, there is like some time in between that is that gets lost in this process. It's quite a long process. It's still an option that we like to rely on. And so I thought, I could share a small anecdote with you from our last complaint from India. It was a former factory worker who didn't receive his benefits and wages after he came back from his leave. And he called the Fairwear complaint hotline and he issued his complaint. And then I got an email from Fairwear, the team in Amsterdam, and they contacted us. So, Katharina, there has been a complaint filed, so please take care of it. And so we didn't have a direct buying relationship with the factory. But our responsibility was to find out what the factory's point of view was. And so we involved the agents in this case, who we had a buying relationship with. And so these agents then informed the factory management. And basically, the question was whether the factory agreed with the complaint or disagreed with the complaint. And so what happened was the factory disagreed with the complaint, and we had to start an investigation because it was said what the complainant said versus what the factory management said. And so eventually we found out that the complainant had a verbal agreement with a supervisor of his, and that was contrary to the written policy of the factory. So the factory insisted on the written policy and denied to be responsible for the open payment to the worker, which was understandable, but we were in a responsibility to solve this together, and it was a little bit rough to get there. In the end, we had solved this complaint, and we paid the worker, and the case could be closed. And the worker received his due amount in the end, but it was hard to get everyone on board in the case. And I guess what this small story shows is, so there are different parties involved in the remediation of these cases. There's us, there's a supplier, there may be even agents involved. And we actually needed the complaint hotline by Fairware to become aware of this issue. And this factory had an outage before, a Fairware outage before, and at least one worker training. And they had a grievance mechanism in place, as well as several policies. And still there had been a violation. And and we as a brand, we had reliable information from Fairware that the worker experienced a violation of his rights. And so we had like a basis to start a dialogue with the factory. Yeah, and from the worker's perspective, he had no access to remediation after he left the factory. So it seemed that the complaint hotline actually was the only access he had to remediation. This was 2 years ago, and in the past 4 years that I've been CSR manager, we had a total of 2 complaints in both production countries, and both cases have been closed and solved, and both of them were about the payment of wages. So, yeah.
Katrina, can you, because as a brand, you have to deal with the with the factories to have these complaint mechanism up and running. What or how do you communicate to your suppliers about the complaint mechanism, and what is their reaction normally?
So what we're doing is when we work with new factories, even though like we have base suppliers that we've been working with from the beginning, there is some hesitance that we experience. We introduce our Fairware membership very from the beginning. We have made it part of our supplier manuals, of our framework contracts. So we introduce the procedure quite early, and usually when suppliers are not familiar with Fairware membership, because we're their first Fairware member brand, they are hesitant. But we have never experienced working with someone who refused to post the worker information sheets with the complaint hotline. or anything. It's usually that suppliers are a little bit like suspicious, and they have a bit more questions about this procedure. And I remember that in some cases we've been directing them with Fairware to get clarity on their questions.
Right. And last question, and maybe you can also elaborate, be a bit, explain it in a bit in detail. So how, such this complaint mechanism, how does it help the brand, in this case, Vista, towards being responsible? And here touching upon the UNGPs on access to remedy as well. How is such a mechanism helping the brand in ensuring that the supply chain is healthy and all systems are in place, and in terms of grievance, they have a mode that they can go to?
Yeah, I think it's like Fairware always says, it is kind of a safety net for the worker. As I explained, it's very rare that I talk directly with workers, and language is a part of why this is. So even though we're on a factory management level, trying to assure that grievance mechanisms are in place, it's very hard for us to check if they are really effective. So it is helping that the workers can access a remedy through the hotline. And for us, it's also helpful that Fairware is the third party, because it is kind of buffering a lot of I don't mean to say that if it's nice to have someone in between that you can blame things to, but it helps a lot to make reason for topics if we as a brand, if we can refer to we're Fairware members, so this is how we have to do it according to Fairware. It really does help. It kind of neutralizes this whole, this is what we want kind of thing. And the other thing I already mentioned, it's nice for us to have a local handler who can check if the complaint is reasonable, who can check all these informations that if you have a case that must be checked, that we wouldn't be able to do, and that needs to be taken seriously or not. So this is all helping us really to solve and to start with any case.
Right. And how easy or difficult it is for you as a brand to address complaints? Generally, you have had, you said you have handled just 2 complaints in the last 4 years, but how difficult or easy it has been?
Okay, so the little story that I talked about, I don't think it was that easy, but it's interesting because you start to engage with the factory management in a different way than you have before, and you have a serious issue, and it's kind of putting the buyer factory relationship on a test too, to see how well this is being handled. That was very interesting. I didn't feel like it was hard to address the complaint, because like I said, for us it's nice to have to say it through the lens of Fairware. And the other complaint actually was solved pretty easily. So in my experience, the little complaints we had, you can go through it, it's okay. It's not easy, but it could be harder, I guess.
Right. Okay, thank you for your response. I have a couple of questions from the chat box that I'll read out to you. And so one question that was also addressed to Amirul, I'll pose to you as well. So how do you convince the companies to join or set up a grievance mechanism in case you have a very little brand leverage or pressure?
That's a good one. I have to say that we have, like I said, we have a couple of suppliers. Most of them we've been working long time. So over the years, there has been, these are factories where we have quite a lot of leverage. There has been a factory, a newer one, where we have rather low leverage, but we had decided to only work with this factory because they had so many grievance mechanisms already in place. It's a bigger factory, and they have a CSR team, and they have different committees like works committee, internal complaint committees. And so we have been only needing to check the functionality of them. And the cooperation is quite good. We already had a FAIRWARE training, and there has been a new format of the committee. I think they needed to elect some members. But the committees are in place and they're working, and so we needed insurance on that.
Right. The second question is to you. You had mentioned of local agents in the sourcing countries. Do you have any guidelines to select or work with such agents?
Yes, actually we do. First of all, we try not to work with agents. We have a long story coming in this particular case. We've been working with these agents for over 10 years. So even before we started to become a FAIRWARE member, and they have been, or they needed to be on board with our idea because they have to represent us in some matters as agency. So whatever we need from the factory management, whatever has to do with improving labor conditions, agents have to be on board with it, and also have to fulfill some tasks like going to factories, doing health and safety checks for us, taking pictures, all these kinds of things when we're unable to do personal travels. So we don't have a lot of buyer relations with agents, but where we have them, we are making sure this.
Right. Okay. There's one question, not to you, but to the technical people from this session. Is the recording of the session going to be available? If so, where and when? I would request Dori or someone to maybe type the answer in the chat box. And while thank you, Katharina, for taking the questions, and also for sharing your thoughts on the grievance mechanism that you are part of, and that is of FAIRWARE, and your experience of dealing with the cases that came through the helpline. I wanted to briefly, for the audience who are here, to share a brief presentation on FAIRWARE mechanism. We have all been talking about the mechanism before, and post that I'll make the concluding remarks from the three speakers that spoke. Right, I'm going to share my screen. So FAIRWARE is an organization that works with brands, workers, and experts to improve conditions in the garment factories for those who make our clothes. So workers in the supply chain are our target group. Our work focuses mostly on eight international labor standards. One, employment is freely chosen, freedom of association and right to collective bargaining, no discrimination in employment, no exploitation of child labor, payment of living wage, reasonable hours work, safe and healthy working conditions, and a legally binding employment relationships. These are all ILO standards. And this is what all our verification and monitoring exercise, all our guidance are based on these 8 labor standards. We have over 130 member brands. Blutskis was one of such brands who are our member. And we are active in 11 production countries. The complaint mechanism adds a very important layer in our verification process. And of course, it facilitates access to remedy. Our role in the access to remedy is to provide an operational system to our member brands, to be in constant communication with the complainant, to investigate the issue and wherever it took place. And this is possible because we have the presence of local team in most of the countries, 11 countries that we are active in. And we also verify the remediation later on. Once the case is remediated, we also go and check, go physically or sometimes just call, depending on the case, whether the case was actually remediated or not, and to the satisfaction of worker, of the complainant rather. The main characteristics of the complaint helpline are, I mean, I shared it before, but I'll say it again. It's a safety net provided for workers and for anyone in the supply chain. By no means it is a replacement of the local system. There's a very active stakeholder engagement in the process of remediation. We facilitate remedy by using leverage of the brand because just only the business relationship with the supplier binds them to listen, I mean, how is it? Follow the complaint mechanism and also be responsive to the complaints that were raised by the complainant. And we have local teams in 11 countries, as I shared before. Particularly this slide I wanted to highlight when I said we don't aim to, or we don't intend to replace the existing mechanisms at the factory. So what you see in red is this mechanism that should be in place in the factory, in the production location. So workers, if they have a problem, they report the problem either to the local union, to workers committee, or if there is a grievance procedure, they would follow that. And depending on the case, there's either they negotiate a solution with the factory manager, and then it is the solution is then meted by the worker. In case of a scenario where the worker does not trust the existing system, or they have approached the system but have not received a satisfactory solution, then they can approach the Fairware helpline system. There where we have telephone numbers in local languages available for workers, and these are advertised during training programs and during audits, as Parvati mentioned during her talk. So workers have these numbers. It's also posted in posters at the factory in different places, so that workers are aware of these numbers. So they call up the helpline once the complaint is registered. The complaint is investigated and then reports the problem to the Fairware Foundation. So we see whether it is admissible, the complaint is admissible or not. And when I say admissible, it means two things. One, that it has to be work related and not any domestic problem or civic problem, like in the community or sewage, there's no water in the community, those problems we cannot take. And secondly, it falls within the supply chain of our member brands. So these two grounds, then it is admissible. Once we receive the complaint, all the complaints are publicly reported on our website. So any of you or whoever wants to look up on the complaints, they can go on our website and check. It is also per country. And we require the brands to the member brand to follow up on the complaint, and the brands are expected to check with the factory about their side of the story, because what we normally get is workers or whoever making the call, we get only one side of the story. So it's upon the brand to get the other side of the story by checking with the supplier, with the supplier management. And then when we have the entire story with us, we either decide whether a further investigation is required, or it can just be solved or remediated over communication through mail. And if in some cases, there's also a mediation meeting that is planned with the management, worker, union, if there's a presence of the union, and fairway. So we also, like on an average, we get some 2 to 3 complaints, at least in India, I can say, where a mediation is required in a case. So this is the complaint mechanism that we encourage workers to follow. Anyone in the supply chain can file a complaint in the system. It can be a union, worker, NGOs, basically anyone who sees that there's a problem. And if there is a direct link in our supply chain, we do take up the complaint. Steps in the procedure, as I said, they call, then there's the authenticity check, whether it can be admissible or not. And there's also a lot of questions, probing question to check whether the complaint is grounded or can be taken up. Admissibility check with the factory falling in the supply chain, getting to get view of both the parties, and this is where the brand's role come in. We investigate the complaint if needed. There's a conclusion whether the complaint is grounded or not. Sometimes it's just made to take the grudge out against the management. And once the complaint is grounded, we make a remediation plan and also facilitate a dialogue with the factory. And once the remediation has taken place, we do a verification on the ground, whether the remediation was up to the satisfaction of worker or the complainant or not. The member brand's responsibilities, we think no complaint can be resolved. In fact, brands are the ultimate responsible unit for anything, for any complaint in the supply chain. They have to ensure awareness and commitment of all suppliers, ensuring workers are informed, and this is through posters and cards and trainings, designating an employee or ensuring availability that these complaint systems are functional in the supply chain, communicate with the supplier. We heard from Katrina about their communication or what do they do with the suppliers, and develop a remediation plan when complaint is grounded, and also ensure its implementation. Some of the data that I want to quickly share over the last few years, the highest number of complaints we have got, this is a cumulative figure of all countries. The highest number of complaints we have received is related to either living wage or a legally binding employment contract. So sometimes, I mean, a lot of times workers are illegally terminated, or there's no full and final settlement of workers, wages have been cut. So those kind of complaints are very high in number. India, China, and Bangladesh, India and China are first and second in terms of the number of complaints that we have received, but it also says that we also have a very high number of factories sourcing to the member brands. And Bangladesh, Turkey, Myanmar then follows in the number of complaints that we have received in our system. Most of the complaints, the filing party were worker, and a small group were from former worker or a group of workers. Unions filing complaint have been very, very few. Unfortunately, that too. The success factor, what we, according to us, what we feel is that it is very accessible to workers. We have people handling the phone who speak their own language. That means more resources from Fairway side, but the end result that we want is more and more workers can access the helpline that is available, and that also makes it more viable for the worker to make a call, even if they don't know the person on the other end. This awareness and trust building, often our work is followed or starts with training and capacity building of workers and factory management. Fairway is considered as an independent assessor, so that adds to the success factor. Capacity on the ground for follow-up. As I said, we have a local team on the ground in 11 countries, which allows us to have the reality check on the ground, uses influence of brand, transparency and accountability. Everything is on website, and we keep updating. Yeah. Okay, and this integration in coherent system that is assessed by Fairway. Some of the challenges we try, but of course it's not 100%. This protection of the complainant, sometimes there are repercussions meted out to the complainant. Although we, time and again, our message to the brand and the supplier is that there should be no retaliation on the worker if they have filed a complaint. Enforcing remediation, it's not always clear what remediation should consist of, although we go by what the law says, law of the land. Safety net versus human rights due diligence and remediation. It's always a question. No, not the way to solve systemic issues. Yeah, this one-on-one complaints can be solved, but if there are structural problems like excessive overtime or non-payment of minimum wages, those things cannot be addressed just by one complaint, and we need more structural remediation plan. It happens, but it's not very quick fix. There's no quick fix to structural problems, and it takes a lot of time and a lot of resource from the brand side to remediate the complaint of structural nature. Access to other brands and mechanisms, and more ownership for local systems, that is access to brands. So these are some of the challenges that our system face. We are trying to work on it with other platforms as well. Some of the new, Fairway, we believe in trying out new solutions, and if it is successful, we also share it in the public platforms. And for some of the cases that are in the slide, you can check on our website. That was a quick one for our, let me share. Yeah. On our complaint mechanism, and now for coming to the highlights of the speakers that we just heard. It was all about Fairway's complaint mechanism, and the idea of the session was to showcase an example of an effective grievance mechanism. And Fairway's, I am from Fairway, and I would, it would be talking too highly of Fairway's mechanism, but of the available grievance mechanisms, Fairway does provide a very effective solution, complaint mechanism solution as an MSI, and I think there's a lot to learn in the process, of course, and we are constantly learning. But other organizations can also benefit from such a complaint mechanism, either learn or collaborate. So that this is the whole idea of this session. Some of the highlights that the speakers made out, shared during their talk was the accessibility part that Parvati mentioned. These numbers are advertised through posters, through information card, and that someone speaking the familiar language on the other side is present. That makes the worker or the complainant a bit comfortable to make the call. It takes some effort to pick up the phone and make the call, but they finally do, is already a great success. And having someone, most of our complaint handlers are female, and also because garment industry is a women-oriented industry, it is very helpful to have a woman taking up the call and speaking the language, so it breaks the barrier of the unknown on the other side. This mediation case is quite high, and this not high, but it gives a very unique touch to our complaint mechanism, and this was highlighted both by Parvati and by Mr. Amirul Haq, because when cases are complicated and it doesn't require just a payment process, a mediation is needed. And in the absence of union, Fairway tries to have the management, the worker, the complainant, and Fairway, and if there is a labor organization or a union, the presence of those bodies help in mediating a case, and this provides a very nice sheen to the existing grievance mechanism of Fairway. From Amirul's he said Fairware's mechanism is one of the best, which I humbly accept. But it's a long way to go as well in terms of making it better and more approachable, more accessible to workers. Again, the whole idea of union finding such a mechanism complementary to their work is a great encouragement to our grievance mechanism, and which I heard Mr. Amirul saying that it's the complaint mechanisms such as the WRCs or Fairwares, they rather complement and not how is it, hijacking the role of union in the industry. And Katrina, from the brand's perspective, you shared your perspective on how such grievance mechanisms make brand more responsible and thereby also allowing brands to follow a sustainable supply chain and also providing a great access to remedy to the workers. And organizations like Fairware or any third party can act as a buffer, taken in a positive sense, and having a local presence that also spares you any anxiety of, are you going in the right direction in remediating the step or not. Thank you so much for sharing your viewpoints and for being part of Fairware's grievance mechanism by supporting the mechanism and using it yourself. Thank you again, and for all the listeners, if you have any question later on the mechanism or you want to learn more, feel free to approach us through our website or through the organizer. I think they'll have our coordinate. Thank you again. Have a good evening. Thank you, Katrina, Mr. Amarul, and Parvati. Thanks a lot. Have a good evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Saraswati.